I'm about to reveal the hidden reason why taking vitamin D alone might be doing absolutely nothing for your health, or worse, actually causing harm to your arteries and raising your blood pressure. If you are dutifully taking your vitamin D supplement every morning because you want strong bones and a robust immune system, but you are missing this one crucial connection, you are essentially driving a car with the emergency brake pulled up. I remember meeting Eleanor, a 74-year-old retired librarian who was incredibly diligent and organized about her health routine. She came to see me because she was frustrated and frightened. Despite taking a high dose of vitamin D for years to protect her bones, her latest scan showed her density was still declining. Even more concerning to her was that her blood pressure, which had always been perfect, was slowly creeping up into the danger zone, and she felt a constant, nagging stiffness in her joints. Eleanor was doing exactly what she had been told to do, but she was missing the supporting actors that make vitamin D safe and effective. She felt like her body was betraying her, but in reality, her biochemistry was just confused because it had the fuel but not the spark plugs. Once we adjusted her regimen to include the missing nutrients I am about to share with you, her blood pressure stabilized, and she finally stopped feeling so brittle. Before we begin, a critical disclaimer. The information I'm sharing today is strictly for educational purposes and should not be considered medical advice. I am not your personal physician and cannot provide individualized medical guidance through this video. Never stop, start, or change any blood pressure or diabetes medication without first consulting with your doctor. The first and arguably most critical missing link is magnesium, which acts as the master key that actually turns vitamin D on within your system. You can swallow the highest quality vitamin D capsule on the market, but until it meets magnesium in your liver and kidneys, it remains biologically inactive and useless to your cells. This matters profoundly because vitamin D does not work by itself. It must undergo a conversion process to become the active hormone that your body uses for repair and regulation. Without sufficient magnesium, this conversion cannot happen, and the vitamin D you take simply circulates in your blood or gets stored in your tissues without conferring any benefits. I recall a patient named Arthur, a 72-year-old gentleman who suffered from terrible leg cramps at night and stubborn high blood pressure that seemed resistant to standard lifestyle changes. Arthur was taking a massive dose of vitamin D because he had read it was good for older adults, but he had no idea that high doses of vitamin D can actually deplete your magnesium reserves even further. He was caught in a vicious cycle where the supplement he was taking to get healthy was draining the very mineral he needed to keep his blood pressure calm and his muscles relaxed. We looked at his diet and realized he was getting almost no magnesium, so his body was borrowing it from his bones and muscles to process the vitamin D, leaving him cramped, anxious, and hypertensive. When you are over 60, your ability to absorb magnesium from food naturally decreases, and yet your need for it remains high, especially if you are managing blood sugar or blood pressure issues. Magnesium is the mineral of relaxation. It is responsible for relaxing the smooth muscle cells inside your arteries, allowing them to widen and let blood flow through with less resistance. If you are deficient in magnesium, and statistically most older adults are, your arteries remain stiff and constricted, which keeps your blood pressure numbers elevated, regardless of what else you do. By correcting Arthur's magnesium levels before worrying about his vitamin D dose, we saw his leg cramps disappear within a week, and his systolic blood pressure dropped by several points simply because his blood vessels could finally relax. The biological reality is that every single molecule of vitamin D you ingest requires magnesium to be metabolized, so if you are low on magnesium and you add more vitamin D, you are creating a functional deficiency that can make you feel worse. This is often why some people report feeling anxious, having heart palpitations, or experiencing trouble sleeping after they start a vitamin D supplement. It is not the vitamin D itself, but the sudden drop in available magnesium that is causing the problem. For seniors, this is doubly important because magnesium also plays a pivotal role in how your body manages insulin and blood sugar. A recent study highlighted that adequate magnesium levels are associated with better insulin sensitivity, meaning your body doesn't have to work as hard to keep your blood sugar stable after a meal. If you have type 2 diabetes or are pre-diabetic, you simply cannot afford to be low in magnesium, as it is a foundational nutrient for metabolic health. To fix this, you do not necessarily need to rely on pills immediately. You can start by incorporating magnesium-rich foods into your daily routine, such as pumpkin seeds, almonds, spinach, and Swiss chard. However, because modern soil is often depleted of minerals, many seniors find that food alone is not enough to get their levels up to where they need to be for optimal vitamin D activation. If you choose to supplement, you must be careful about the type you choose, as not all magnesium is created equal for the aging body. Avoid magnesium oxide, which is poorly absorbed and mostly acts as a laxative. Instead, look for magnesium glycinate or magnesium citrate, which are much gentler on the stomach and better absorbed into the bloodstream. Arthur started adding a small handful of pumpkin seeds to his morning oats and took a gentle magnesium supplement in the evening, and the difference in his health was night and day. He went from thinking he needed more medication to realizing he just needed to fuel the enzymatic processes that were already trying to work in his body. This supports steadier readings and ensures that the vitamin D you are taking is actually being put to work rather than sitting dormant in your system. The second major error is taking vitamin D without vitamin K2, which acts as the traffic controller for calcium in your body. When you take vitamin D, one of its primary jobs is to increase the amount of calcium your intestines absorb from the food you eat. This sounds beneficial because we all want strong bones, but there is a dangerous catch. Vitamin D brings the calcium into the blood, but it does not tell the calcium where to go. Without guidance, that excess calcium can easily end up in places you absolutely do not want it, such as the soft tissues of your joints or, more dangerously, the inner lining of your arteries. This is often referred to as the calcium paradox, where a person can have osteoporosis and weak bones while simultaneously suffering from calcified, hardened arteries. I worked with a woman named Margaret, 68 years old, who came to me absolutely terrified after a cardiac calcium scan showed she had early signs of calcification in her arteries. Margaret was confused because she had been drinking milk and taking vitamin D faithfully for 20 years to prevent the very bone loss she was worried about. She felt betrayed by her own efforts, thinking that her healthy habits had somehow backfired on her, and in a specific way, they actually had. She had plenty of calcium entering her system thanks to the vitamin D, but she had virtually no vitamin K2 in her diet to direct that calcium into her skeletal structure. Consequently, the calcium was settling in her blood vessels, turning them from flexible, rubber-like tubes into stiff, rigid pipes that forced her heart to pump harder. This stiffness is a primary driver of isolated systolic hypertension in seniors, where the top number goes up because the arteries cannot expand when the heart beats. Vitamin K2 activates a specific protein called matrix GLA protein, which acts like a street sweeper, removing calcium from soft tissues and arteries and depositing it into the bone matrix where it belongs. Once Margaret understood this mechanism, she realized that simply taking more calcium or vitamin D was not the answer. She needed to redirect the minerals she already had. We adjusted her nutrition to focus on sources of K2, and she spoke to her doctor about adding a K2 supplement to her daily regimen. Over the next year, her bone density stabilized, but more importantly, her blood pressure management became much easier because we stopped fueling the hardening of her arteries. It is important to note that vitamin K1, found in leafy greens like kale and spinach, is different from K2. While K1 is excellent for blood clotting, it does not have the same powerful effect on calcium redirection as K2. Vitamin K2 is found in fermented foods like natto, certain cheeses like Gouda and Brie, and in the fat of grass-fed animals, which are foods that many seniors have been told to avoid due to outdated low-fat dietary advice. If you are avoiding all animal fats and fermented foods, you might be critically low in this nutrient, leaving your arteries vulnerable to calcification even if you are doing everything else right. For those watching their blood sugar, this connection is also relevant because calcified arteries impair circulation to the extremities, which is already a risk factor for anyone with diabetes. Keeping your blood vessels distinct, flexible, and free of calcium deposits ensures that oxygen and nutrients can reach your toes, eyes, and kidneys, which are the areas most susceptible to damage from high blood sugar. Margaret's story teaches us that biology is about balance, not just abundance. You cannot just flood the system with one good thing without considering the downstream effects. I often tell my patients that vitamin D loads the gun, but vitamin K2 decides what you are aiming at, and you definitely want to aim at your bones, not your heart. By ensuring you have adequate K2, you are protecting your cardiovascular system from the unintended consequences of calcium absorption, allowing you to take vitamin D safely. This supports steadier readings by maintaining the elasticity of your vascular system, which is the physical foundation of healthy blood pressure. Before we move to the next item, I want to ask you a quick question to help me understand who is watching. Comment your age and your usual top number range for your blood pressure in the comments below. It helps me see how common these issues are in our community. The third mistake is taking your vitamin D supplement on an empty stomach or with a breakfast that contains zero fat. Vitamin D is biologically classified as a fat-soluble vitamin, which means it literally dissolves in fat and requires dietary fat to be absorbed through the intestinal wall. If you take your vitamin D pill with a glass of water, black coffee, and a piece of dry toast, you are likely flushing a massive percentage of that supplement right down the toilet. Your body simply cannot grab onto the molecule without the presence of fat to stimulate the release of bile, which acts as the carrier vehicle. I remember Henry, a 75-year-old retired engineer who approached his health with mathematical precision but was seeing zero results. Henry was taking a very expensive, high-quality vitamin D supplement every morning at 7 a.m. sharp, but his blood work consistently showed he was deficient, hovering in the low 20s. He was frustrated and assumed the supplement company was selling him a fake product, or that his body had lost the ability to absorb nutrients due to his age. When I asked him to walk me through his morning routine, he explained that he practiced intermittent fasting and didn't eat his first real meal until noon, so his morning pill was taken with just black coffee. This was the smoking gun. Without fat, the vitamin was sliding through his digestive tract without ever crossing into his bloodstream to do its job. We didn't need to change his dosage or the brand of his supplement. We simply had to change the timing or the context in which he took it. For seniors, this is particularly tricky because digestion slows down as we age, and bile production can be less efficient, making the need for a carrier fat even more critical. Henry decided to shift his vitamin D intake to his lunch, which usually included some olive oil dressing or a piece of salmon, and within 3 months, his levels shot up to the optimal range without him spending an extra penny. This absorption issue connects directly to blood sugar management as well, because eating healthy fats with your meals is a powerful way to blunt the glucose spike that comes from carbohydrates. If you take your vitamin D with a breakfast that includes eggs or avocado, not only are you maximizing the vitamin absorption, but you are also stabilizing your blood sugar for the rest of the morning. Stable blood sugar prevents the inflammation that damages blood vessel walls, further protecting you from the root causes of high blood pressure. You do not need to consume a greasy, heavy meal to get this benefit. Even a small amount of healthy fat, roughly 5 to 10 grams, is sufficient to trigger the necessary bile release. Good options include a handful of walnuts, a spoon of extra virgin olive oil drizzled over tomatoes, or a slice of cheese if your diet allows it. For Henry, simply understanding the chemistry of his digestion turned a failed intervention into a successful one, and he felt a significant boost in his mood and immune resilience once his levels finally normalized. It is a common misconception that vitamins are magic pills that work regardless of how we treat them, but they are chemical compounds that follow strict rules of biology. If you are going to the trouble and expense of taking supplements, you owe it to yourself to ensure they are actually entering your system. Most older adults can try this safely by simply pairing their supplement with the largest meal of the day rather than forcing it down with morning coffee. Here is another simple habit that supports steadier readings. Always check the label of your vitamin D supplement to see if it is already suspended in oil. Some higher quality soft gels come with olive oil or MCT oil inside the capsule, which helps, but relying on dietary fat is still the best insurance policy for maximum absorption. Also, be aware that certain weight loss medications or fat-blocking drugs can inhibit the absorption of fat-soluble vitamins, so if you are on those, you need to be extra strategic with your timing. Henry was relieved to learn that his body wasn't broken, it just needed the right instructions, and that is a powerful realization for anyone over 60. This simple adjustment ensures you get what you pay for and provides the foundation for the metabolic benefits we are looking for. I have more crucial adjustments to share with you, including one about testing that could save you from toxicity, so pay close attention to the next points. The fourth critical mistake is relying on guesswork instead of accurate measurement when it comes to your dosage. You cannot feel your vitamin D level in the same way you might feel a headache or a sore muscle, and because the symptoms of deficiency are often vague, fatigue, aches, brain fog, it is impossible to know where you stand without data. Many seniors fall into the trap of taking the exact same dose as their neighbor or spouse, assuming that one size fits all, but vitamin D metabolism is highly individual and depends on your body weight, your skin tone, your genetics, and the health of your liver and kidneys. I remember a patient named Betty, a 65-year-old grandmother who was deeply health conscious but had a fear of doctors and needles. Betty decided to manage her health on her own and, after reading an article about the benefits of vitamin D, she started taking a very high dose, significantly more than the standard recommendation. She felt fantastic for the first few months, which reinforced her belief that more was better, so she continued this high-dose regimen without ever getting a blood test to confirm her levels. Eventually, Betty came to see me not for bone health, but because she was experiencing waves of nausea, a strange metallic taste in her mouth, and excessive thirst that kept her up at night. She was worried she had developed diabetes because of the thirst, but when we ran her panels, her blood sugar was normal. However, her vitamin D levels were off the charts, sitting at a toxic level that was causing calcium to flood her bloodstream, a condition known as hypercalcemia. This excess calcium was putting a tremendous strain on her kidneys and causing her nausea, essentially poisoning her system because she had overdosed on a good thing. We had to stop her supplementation immediately and hydrate her aggressively to flush the excess calcium out, and it took months for her levels to return to a safe range. Betty's story illustrates a vital lesson. Vitamin D is a hormone precursor that accumulates in your body fat, meaning it builds up over time and does not wash out quickly like vitamin C or B vitamins. If you are taking a supplement blindly, you are flying an airplane without an altimeter. You might be cruising at a perfect altitude, or you might be about to crash into a mountain, and you won't know until it is too late. The only way to know your true status is to ask your doctor for a specific blood test called the 25-hydroxy-vitamin D test. This is the gold standard for measuring how much stored vitamin D you have available for your body to use, and it cuts through all the guesswork. For older adults, the sweet spot is generally considered to be between 40 and 60 nanograms per milliliter, although some functional medicine practitioners prefer slightly higher ranges for autoimmune conditions. If you are below 30, you are likely deficient and need a strategy to raise your levels. If you are above 80 or 100, you might be entering the danger zone where toxicity becomes a real risk. Once Betty recovered, we restarted her on a much more modest dose tailored to her specific needs, and we monitored her blood work every 6 months to ensure she stayed in the safety corridor. Her blood pressure, which had spiked during her toxic episode due to the calcium overload, returned to a healthy baseline, and she learned that true health is about precision, not just volume. Most older adults can try this safely by simply requesting this test at their next annual physical. It is a standard lab that is widely available and often covered by insurance. Here is another simple habit. Once you know your number, write it down and track it over the years so you can see if your current dose is actually working or if your absorption is changing as you age. It is important to remember that as we get older, our skin becomes less efficient at producing vitamin D from the sun, so even if you spend time in the garden, you cannot assume you are getting enough. This supports steadier readings because keeping your vitamin D in the optimal range helps regulate the renin-angiotensin system, a major control system for blood pressure. The fifth mistake is a common one among seniors who are worried about bone density: taking high-dose calcium supplements alongside their vitamin D. For decades, we were told that to have strong bones, we needed to take calcium pills, and many older adults are still following this advice religiously. However, when you combine a high-dose calcium supplement with vitamin D, you create a situation where your body is flooded with calcium all at once, which can overwhelm your system's ability to direct it properly. I worked with James, an 80-year-old retired carpenter who was dealing with significant back pain and a fear of hip fractures. James was taking a daily combination of 5,000 IU of vitamin D and a massive 1,200 nanometers calcium tablet, thinking he was building a fortress of bone. Instead of feeling stronger, James developed a painful kidney stone that required medical intervention, an experience he described as worse than any injury he had ever sustained on a job site. The problem was that the vitamin D was supercharging the absorption of that massive calcium pill, causing a spike in blood calcium that his kidneys had to filter out. Because the concentration in his urine became so high, the calcium crystallized into stones, causing immense pain and potential damage to his renal function. Furthermore, recent studies have suggested that these sudden spikes in blood calcium from supplements, often called the calcium bolus effect, might be linked to a higher risk of heart attacks and strokes. The reason is similar to what we discussed with vitamin K2. When there is too much calcium in the blood at once, it is more likely to settle in the arterial walls, contributing to plaque stability and stiffness. James was shocked to learn that his bone insurance was actually a liability for his heart and kidneys. We adjusted his strategy to focus on food-based calcium, which is absorbed much more slowly and safely than the calcium found in chalky tablets. We encouraged him to eat more yogurt, sardines with bones, cheese, and leafy greens, which provide calcium in a matrix of other nutrients that buffer its absorption. When you get calcium from food, it enters your bloodstream in a slow, steady trickle rather than a massive flood, allowing your body to utilize it effectively without overwhelming your regulatory mechanisms. James stopped the calcium pills but kept the vitamin D, along with K2 and magnesium, and his kidney stone issues resolved completely. Interestingly, his blood pressure also improved because his kidneys were under less stress, and kidney health is intimately tied to blood pressure regulation. If you have been told to take calcium by your doctor, do not stop it without talking to them, but it is worth having a conversation about whether you can achieve your goals through dietary changes instead. For seniors with diabetes, this is also relevant because kidney protection is a top priority. High blood sugar already stresses the filtration units of the kidneys, so adding a calcium overload is unnecessary stress. Most older adults can try this safely by auditing their diet to see how much calcium they are actually getting. You might be surprised to find you are getting plenty from your meals. If you know someone over 50 who could benefit from this, share this video, and subscribe for more simple blood pressure tips. One more easy change is to spread out your calcium intake throughout the day rather than taking it all at once, if you must supplement, to mimic the natural intake from food. This supports steadier readings by protecting the kidneys and preventing the arterial stiffness associated with calcium overload. The sixth item is failing to recognize the profound connection between vitamin D levels and your metabolic health, specifically your blood sugar and insulin sensitivity. Many people think of vitamin D solely as a bone vitamin, but in reality, it acts more like a steroid hormone that interacts with receptors on almost every cell in your body, including the beta cells in your pancreas that produce insulin. If you are struggling with prediabetes, stubborn weight gain around the midsection, or blood sugar numbers that won't budge despite your best efforts, a vitamin D deficiency could be the silent culprit. I recall Clara, a 70-year-old woman who had been battling prediabetes for 5 years. Clara was frustrated because she followed a strict low-carb diet, walked every day, and did everything right, yet her fasting glucose remained stubbornly high, hovering just under the diabetic range. She felt like her metabolism was broken and was resigned to the idea that she would eventually need insulin injections like her mother did. When we looked at her full panel, her vitamin D level was extremely low, sitting at just 18 nanograms per milliliter. I explained to Clara that without adequate vitamin D, her pancreas struggled to release insulin efficiently, and her cells were less responsive to the insulin that was released. Essentially, her body was resistant to its own signals, keeping her blood sugar elevated because the glucose couldn't get into the cells where it was needed for energy. We started a protocol to correct her deficiency, treating it as a metabolic intervention rather than just a nutritional one. Within 6 months, as her vitamin D levels climbed into the optimal range of 50, her fasting blood sugar began to drop for the first time in years. Clara was amazed that a vitamin could have such a potent effect on her blood sugar, but the science supports this. Vitamin D helps reduce chronic inflammation, which is a primary driver of insulin resistance. By lowering the systemic inflammation in her body, we allowed her insulin receptors to work properly again, and her numbers finally reflected the hard work she was putting in with her diet. For seniors, this link is crucial because type 2 diabetes and high blood pressure almost always go hand in hand. They are twin manifestations of metabolic dysfunction. If you found this information helpful, please consider sharing it with a friend or family member who might be making these same mistakes. And subscribe for more simple senior health tips that respect your intelligence and your time.